This video is a video about me becoming well-read. I have a lot of books in my collection, some of which I've read, some of which I haven't. And this video is a video talking about one of those books in an attempt to become well-read. This is The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks. And it's a book that was written quite a bit ago in 1987. Hey guys, this is the second part of the series, Becoming Well-Read. The first part was about An Anthropologist on Mars by Oliver Sacks, and now I've just finished reading, like a week and a half ago, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Now, it might seem difficult to mistake your wife for a hat, but this guy had the problem where his vision wasn't really giving him the same type of information that your vision or my vision, or what we might consider normal vision, gives us. He can see things in part, but not in whole. So maybe he recognized the darkness of her hair and confused that for his hat and grabbed it and tried to put it on his head. But let's get right into the story. This book has 24 different chapters, and they're just all different clinical tales of people with problems. And it's sort of like An Anthropologist on Mars, where it goes through people that have different ways of thinking and neurological sort of glitches in their brain. But unlike An Anthropologist on Mars, this book doesn't go really in depth into the personal lives of these people. It's more using them as examples to further sort of the groupings of chapters he has. And he has 4 groupings of chapters in this book. So the first grouping of chapters is losses. People who have lost something in their brain. For example, the man who mistook his wife for a hat lost his ability to identify what he was seeing. That's just one example. I'm not going to go over all 24 chapters, but just a few examples from each category. For the man who mistook his wife for a hat, which is the very first story here, I really liked one of the descriptions that the guy gave. So Oliver Sacks gave the man a glove, and the guy was trying to figure out what the glove was, and Oliver Sacks told him to describe it, and the guy was like, well, it's a continuous surface, and it has these 5 outpouchings, and it might be a container for something. And so Oliver Sacks asked, well, what do you think is a container for? And the guy guessed that it might be a container for coins, because the different outpouchings might be to sort different types of coins. A good guess, but no, it was a glove. That's the type of losses he talks about in the first part of this book. He also talks about people who have basically lost their sense that their body is their own. And so there was one man who woke up from bed and thought that the leg that was there in his bed was someone else's, and he threw it off of the bed, and obviously he was attached to the leg, so he went with it. And when the nurses and doctors came in, he was like, no, this leg isn't mine. And it's just a really strange story, but the stories in this book are like that. The stories in this book are enjoyable in short bursts, but I don't feel like they have that personal touch that the Anthropologist on Mars had. If you're studying the brain or want to see like very interesting stories of what the brain can do, I recommend reading this book. But if you're looking for like a more in-depth view of people, sort of like an anthropological study, Anthropologist on Mars would be the way to go. But now let's get into the second part of this book, excesses. Now when he talks about excess, he means that people who do things extra as opposed to loss. For example, people who have tics or Tourette's. And he talks about this guy called Wiki Tiki Ray, who I guess he was like a drummer, and he's really good. He could control his Tourette's when he's drumming, but not in other situations, so that was interesting. A similar story was seen in Anthropologist on Mars about the doctor, the surgeon, who was also a Tourette'er. He had Tourette's. The story I liked most from these excesses was Cupid's disease. It's about an old woman who apparently had gotten neurosyphilis when she was younger. She had contracted syphilis that was never fully cured, and in later life she had gained a libido, I guess you would call it, a sexual drive, and she really liked it. And she, Oliver Sacks sees her, and she really doesn't want to be cured because she doesn't want the changes, the sexual changes, those feelings to go away. And he lets her know that he could cure the syphilis and the changes to the brain are permanent, so good for her. But that one I found interesting. That was Cupid's Disease, Chapter 11. The next part of this book is transports, and basically it's about the way we remember things, the way we reminisce. The story that got me here the most was the one on murder. So there was this guy who had committed a murder a long time ago, but he didn't remember it, and it sort of was like his mind had blocked off the memory of the murder, and so I don't think he was like fully charged for it because he didn't fully remember it. But then later on, it's sort of all he could remember. It came back to him in a way. I forget what caused that reminiscence to occur, but it haunted him, the murder that he had committed. And that was chapter 19, and it was one that I really enjoyed. The last part of this book is the world of the simple, and that deals with people with autism. And one of the stories that I really liked was the story of the twins, and they loved prime numbers. They had like their own language where they spoke prime numbers, and the other twin would think about the number, you know, sort of to see if it's really prime, and then when it was, he'd smile, and they'd come up with this insanely large prime numbers that any normal person probably wouldn't come up with. They also had this really good memory for calendars, and you'd give them a date and they'd tell you how the weather was on that date and things like that. Or like you give them a date in the future and they'd tell you what day of the week that would happen on that day, and it could be years and years from now, and you know, they'd sort of in their head see where all the dates lied, and it was pretty cool. They were separated and they lost their ability to do that as they were sort of trying to be taught to socialize, and in some ways there's like a loss there. That kind of had me feeling uneasy when I read that part, but I actually really did like this book. I enjoyed reading it. I probably didn't enjoy it as much as An Anthropologist on Mars. Would I recommend this book? I would recommend reading Anthropologist on Mars first, and then this second. I'd put it behind Anthropologist on Mars, sort of in the rankings. But yeah, that's the second book for Becoming Well Read. I really hope you guys enjoy this series. I had gotten a comment on the last video telling me not to record where I had recorded before, or at the angle I had recorded before, so I'm doing this series here in front of my book and gaming shelf. Hopefully you guys enjoy this a bit more. And so, before I let you go, just a few quick other things. I'm currently reading Hearts in Atlantis by Stephen King, so this is the next book I'm going to be reading. I figured, you know, take a short break from reading nonfiction to read something a bit more fiction and interesting. I read it a while ago. I'm currently, I'd say about 30% of the way, maybe closer to 40% of the way. And I remember the stories somewhat, but I don't remember them as if they're fresh in my mind, so I'm reading it like if it's new. But if you've read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, if you've read this book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, leave a comment down below, subscribe, leave a thumbs up. I really appreciate those things. And let me know what you think about this book, about this video series, and about what I'm trying to do, reading all the books in my collection so I can become more well-read. Thanks for watching.